I always thought I had a good life. A stable job, a loving wife, and a home filled with warmth. It wasn't perfect, of course, no marriage ever is, but I had never doubted Melissa's love for me. We had met in college, built a life together, and when the opportunity came for me to work at a prestigious company, she supported me without hesitation. What I didn't know at the time was that she would soon be working there too. Melissa had been a secretary at a smaller firm when an opening appeared in my company's administrative department. It seemed like a great fit. She was efficient, charming, and well organized. More importantly, it meant we'd see each other more often. When she got the job, I was thrilled. We could grab lunch together, commute home at the end of the day, and strengthen the bond we had built over years of marriage. For a while, everything was perfect. She quickly adapted to the new environment, earning the trust of executives, managers, and employees alike. Everyone loved her, and I couldn't have been prouder. I was often teased in the office about how lucky I was to have such a smart and beautiful wife. I would smile, feeling fortunate that she was mine. But looking back now, I wonder if I had been blind to the signs, or if I had simply refused to see them. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Melissa and I still had our morning routines together, our shared lunches, and our comfortable evenings at home. But then, little things began to change. She started staying late at the office more often. It was always something reasonable, a last-minute meeting, an urgent report, a favor for one of the executives. I didn't think much of it. After all, I worked there too, and I knew how demanding the company could be. Then, there were the messages. She had always been attentive when we were together, but now her phone was constantly buzzing. She would glance at the screen, smile slightly, and type back a response before setting it face down on the table. If I asked, she would laugh it off, just work stuff, nothing exciting. I didn't question it. Why would I? We had built our marriage on trust, and trust was something I had never had reason to doubt. But doubt has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. The first real pang came one evening when I picked her up from work. She had texted me earlier to say she was wrapping up a meeting with Mr. Donovan, the company's director. It wasn't unusual. He was known for being hands-on with his staff, and Melissa often mentioned how much she admired his leadership. But when she finally walked out of the building, I noticed something strange. She was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile she usually had after a long workday. It was softer, almost secretive. And as she got into the car, she smelled different, like expensive cologne that wasn't hers. I didn't say anything. I should have. But instead, I forced a smile, kissed her on the cheek, and told myself I was imagining things. Melissa's late nights became more frequent. What started as an occasional meeting turned into a regular occurrence. Some nights, she wouldn't get home until hours after I did, offering explanations that felt just a little too perfect. The director needed me to proofread an important contract. There was a last-minute client dinner, and it would have been rude to decline. We were finalizing details for the annual company gala. It's a huge deal, and Mr. Donovan wanted everything just right. Mr. Donovan. His name began to surface more and more in our conversations. She spoke about him with admiration, sometimes even excitement. How he was brilliant, how he ran the company with such confidence, how he trusted her more than anyone else in the office. It should have made me proud that my wife was excelling in her career. But instead, it made my stomach turn. Still, I silenced my doubts. She was my wife. She loved me. Then, one evening, I saw something I couldn't ignore. I had finished work early and decided to surprise Melissa by waiting outside the office to drive her home. I sent her a text, letting her know I was outside, and watched as the employees trickled out of the building. Minutes passed. Then I saw her. She wasn't alone. Mr. Donovan was with her, standing just a little too close, his hand lingering on her arm as they spoke. She laughed, softly, intimately. The kind of laugh she used to reserve for me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, as if sensing my eyes on her, she turned. Our gazes met through the windshield, and for the briefest moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe even guilt. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a bright smile as she hurried toward the car. "Hey, babe," she said, slipping into the passenger seat. "What a nice surprise." She kissed my cheek, but for the first time, it didn't feel the same. And for the first time, I started to wonder if I really wanted to know the truth. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Melissa slept beside me, her breathing slow and steady. My mind raced with images of her and Mr. Donovan, standing close, whispering, sharing something I wasn't a part of. I told myself I was being paranoid. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had smiled at me, kissed me like always. Maybe I was just overthinking things, letting my insecurities twist something innocent into something sinister. And yet, something felt different. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy. I went to work, came home, and pretended everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was watching our marriage unravel thread by thread, and I didn't know how to stop it. Melissa's phone became an extension of her hand. She was more protective of it than before, angling the screen away when she texted, taking calls in the other room. When I asked about it, she brushed it off with a laugh. "Just work, Jake. You know how demanding Mr. Donovan can be." That name again. I didn't press further. I didn't want to seem insecure, to be the kind of husband who didn't trust his wife. But the doubt had settled deep in my bones, refusing to leave. Then, one evening, something happened that I couldn't ignore. We were having dinner, just the two of us, candlelight flickering between us like it had so many times before. I wanted to bridge the distance, to find our way back to the comfort we once had. "Let's take a weekend trip," I suggested. "Just us. No work, no phones. What do you think?" She hesitated, and I saw it in her eyes before she even spoke. "I don't know if I can," she said, pushing food around her plate. "There's a big project coming up, and Mr. Donovan really needs me right now." The words stung. More than that, the way she said them stung, like she wasn't just considering my feelings, like she had already made up her mind. I forced a smile. "I understand." But I didn't. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was losing her. The distance between us grew, not all at once, but in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. Melissa stopped reaching for my hand when we walked together. The lingering kisses that used to greet me after work became routine pecks, absent of warmth. Our conversations felt hollow, like we were actors playing the roles of a happy couple rather than actually being one. She was there, but not really. And then, one evening, the first real crack in her carefully built wall appeared. I had left my work laptop at home that morning, so I returned during lunch to grab it. As I walked up to our house, I saw Melissa's car still in the driveway. That was strange, she had told me she had an important morning meeting. Curious, I stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet except for the faint hum of conversation coming from the kitchen. I followed the sound, my heart pounding with an inexplicable sense of dread. And then I heard it. "God, I can't wait to see you again," Melissa's voice floated through the air, soft and almost breathless. A pause. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing." Something inside me cracked. I didn't need to hear the rest. I backed away from the doorway, heart hammering, bile rising in my throat. I felt like an intruder in my own life, like I had stumbled into a story that wasn't mine. I wanted to storm in, to demand an explanation. But a deep, unsettling fear held me back. What if I wasn't ready for the truth? Instead, I turned and left, my footsteps careful and silent. I drove back to work, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I replayed her words over and over. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing." But now I did. That night, I said nothing. I sat across from Melissa at dinner, studying her, watching the way she smiled, the way she laughed at something on her phone. I wondered if she had been texting him. I needed to know. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to an old college friend, Mark, who worked in cybersecurity. I told him I had a suspicion and asked if there was any way he could help. Mark hesitated. "Jake, are you sure you want to go down this road?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But I needed answers. "Yeah," I said. "I need to know." Within a few hours, I had them. Mark was able to access Melissa's call logs and messages from our shared phone account. He didn't need to say much, he just sent me a file. I sat in my office staring at it for what felt like hours before I finally opened it. It was worse than I had imagined. Mr. Donovan. The name was all over the messages. The texts between them were intimate, far too intimate for a professional relationship. There were late-night messages, inside jokes, and conversations about how much they missed each other. And then there were the pictures, Melissa smiling in ways she hadn't smiled for me in a long time, taken at expensive restaurants I had never been to with her. My blood ran cold. The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, had already given herself to someone else. And worst of all, she had done it right under my nose. Confrontation. That evening, I waited. I needed her to see me, to hear me, to understand that the truth was no longer a secret. Melissa walked through the front door, her face lighting up when she saw me, like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't breaking me apart piece by piece. "Hey, babe," she said, kicking off her heels. "How was your day?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my voice to stay even. "Sit down, Melissa." She hesitated. Something in my tone must have tipped her off. "Why?" I pulled out my phone, opened the messages, and slid it across the table to her. Her face drained of color as she picked it up. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she exhaled. "Jake." I held up a hand, stopping her. I didn't want excuses. I didn't want lies. "I just have one question," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long?" Melissa looked down, guilt flickering in her eyes. And then, softly, too softly, she answered. 6 months. The world blurred. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of stolen moments, whispered secrets, and a love that had once been ours now shared with someone else. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I felt like I was going to be sick. "You don't have to say anything else," I managed, my voice hollow. "I already know everything I need to." Melissa reached for me. "Jake, please." I stepped back. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't want her touch. For the first time, I realized. The woman I loved was already gone. Melissa's face crumpled when I pulled away. I could see it, the regret, the panic. But the time for regrets had passed. "Jake, please," she said again, her voice trembling now. "I can explain." Explain? What was there to explain? The messages, the late nights, the laughter she shared with another man while I sat at home, believing in a marriage that had already begun to rot. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay composed. "Explain what, exactly?" I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "That you've been lying to me for 6 months. That while I've been here, waiting for you, you've been with him." She flinched. "It wasn't like that." I let out a hollow laugh. "Then tell me, Melissa. What was it like?" Silence. That was the answer. She couldn't justify it because there was no justification. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "You didn't just hurt me, Melissa. You destroyed us." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I picked up my phone and walked to the door. "I need some air," I said. "Jake, don't." I didn't let her finish. I stepped out and shut the door behind me, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of what she had done. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, trying to pinpoint where it had all gone wrong. Had she always been capable of this? Or had something changed? I didn't know. And maybe I never would. Eventually, I ended up at my brother Lucas's house. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Jake," he said cautiously. "What happened?" I exhaled slowly, then met his eyes. "She cheated on me, Lucas." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, without a word, he opened the door wider. "Come in." I did. And for the first time since discovering the truth, I let myself break. Lucas poured me a drink and listened as I told him everything. The late nights. The lies. The messages. "Mr. Donovan." When I was done, he let out a low breath, shaking his head. "Jake. I don't even know what to say." "Neither do I." We sat in silence for a long time. Then he leaned forward, his expression serious. "What are you going to do?" I stared into my glass. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't stay with her." "I won't." Lucas nodded. "Then you need a plan." And so, we made one. By the time I left Lucas's house, my mind was clear. Melissa had made her choice. Now, I was making mine. I spent the next few days gathering everything I needed, financial records, legal documents, everything to ensure that when I walked away, I did it on my terms. Melissa tried to talk to me, tried to apologize, but I shut her out. At work, things felt surreal. Mr. Donovan acted as though nothing had happened, but I saw the smugness in his eyes, the way he looked at me like he had won. He hadn't won. Not yet. When Friday came, I walked into my boss's office and resigned. He looked shocked. "Jake, is this about Donovan? Did something happen?" I hesitated for only a second. Then I nodded. "Yes." That was all I said. By the end of the day, my resignation was official. I was free of the job that had unknowingly bound me to my wife's betrayal. That evening, I went home, where Melissa was waiting for me, her eyes rimmed red from crying. I stood in the doorway, staring at the woman I had once loved with everything in me. "I'm leaving," I said simply. Her breath hitched. "Jake." "No," I cut her off. "This is over, Melissa. You ended it the moment you chose him." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But I love you." I shook my head. "No, Melissa. You don't." And with that, I walked away. I didn't look back. Not this time. I packed my bags that night, moving through the house like a ghost. Every step felt heavier than the last, every glance at the familiar walls more painful than I could bear. The memories were everywhere, the framed photos of vacations, the couch where we used to cuddle on movie nights, the dining table where we shared countless meals. It wasn't just a house, it was our life. But now, it felt like a stranger's home. Melissa watched me in silence, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. There was nothing left to say. As I zipped up my suitcase, she finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "Where will you go?" I didn't look at her. "Lucas's place for now." She nodded slowly, like she had been expecting that answer. "I never wanted this, Jake," she whispered. I paused, gripping the handle of my bag. "You say that like you didn't make a choice." Her breath hitched, and I knew she had no response. I walked past her, my suitcase rolling behind me, and headed for the front door. Just before I stepped outside, I hesitated. Some part of me, the part that had loved her for so many years, wanted to turn around, to give her one last chance to say something that would make this all make sense. But she didn't. So I left. Lucas welcomed me without hesitation. He had already set up the guest room for me, and as I dropped my bag at the foot of the bed, the weight of everything hit me all at once. I had just walked away from my marriage. The life I had built was gone. Lucas appeared in the doorway, holding 2 beers. He handed me one and sat on the edge of the bed. "You did the right thing," he said simply. I let out a slow breath. "Then why does it feel like hell?" "Because endings always do. The first few days were the hardest. I went to work, kept my head down, and avoided Melissa entirely. I knew she was trying to reach me, she left voicemails, sent texts, even emailed me. But I didn't answer. I couldn't. Then, on the 3rd day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Mr. Carter?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Amanda from Harrison & Company. Law firm. Your wife has retained legal counsel. I wanted to reach out regarding the next steps in your divorce proceedings." I closed my eyes. I had known this was coming, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. "I'll have my lawyer reach out," I said, my voice detached. "Understood," she said. "One more thing, Melissa has requested mediation rather than a formal court proceeding. She'd like to settle things amicably." Amicably. I almost laughed at the word. There was nothing amicable about betrayal. Still, I didn't want a long, drawn-out battle. I wanted this to be over. "Fine," I said. "Tell her lawyer I'll agree to mediation." The following week, I sat across from Melissa in a small conference room, our lawyers flanking us. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't feel sorry for her. The meeting was brief: division of assets, finalization of paperwork, agreements on who got what. We had no children, no shared businesses, just a house that neither of us wanted anymore. When it was over, our lawyers stepped out to finalize the details, leaving us alone for the first time since I had left. Melissa shifted in her chair. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice quiet. I met her eyes, holding back the storm inside me. Happy? No. But at least I can look at myself in the mirror. She flinched. "I made a mistake." "No, Melissa," I said, my voice calm but firm. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something you don't mean in an argument. What you did was a choice. And choices have consequences." She looked away, blinking back tears. "I never stopped loving you." I stood, gathering my papers. "You did the moment you let him touch you." She didn't try to stop me as I walked out the door. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I got an apartment, started going to the gym again, reconnected with old friends. I even went on a few dates, though my heart wasn't fully in it yet. Then, one evening, I got a call from an old coworker. "You won't believe this," he said. "Mr. Donovan got fired." I sat up straighter. "What?" "Yeah. Turns out, yours wasn't the only marriage he ruined. Some executive's wife had an affair with him too. The board found out, and they kicked him out." A slow, grim satisfaction settled over me. "What about Melissa?" I asked. "She still works there, but it's different now. People talk. She's not the golden girl anymore." I didn't feel joy at her downfall. Just closure. Months passed, and one day, out of the blue, I received an email from her. It was short. "Jake, I don't expect a response. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I lost everything that mattered. I hope someday you find happiness again." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the email. I didn't need her apology. I had already moved on. A year passed. It was strange how time moved, slowly at first, each day dragging under the weight of betrayal, then all at once, like a flood washing away everything that once felt permanent. The pain had dulled, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Some wounds never fully heal, but you learn to live with the scars. I had rebuilt my life in ways I never expected. My new apartment became a home. I found joy in small things again, late-night walks, Sunday morning coffee at a quiet cafe, books I had never made time for before. I reconnected with people I had neglected during my marriage, throwing myself into friendships that had withstood time and distance. Melissa faded into the background of my life. I saw her only in brief flashes, in old photos tucked away in storage boxes, in the occasional mutual acquaintance mentioning her in passing. She never reached out again after that last email, and I never felt the need to respond. Then, one evening, I ran into her. It was at a restaurant, one of those upscale places where the lighting was dim and the wine flowed freely. I was meeting Lucas for dinner, catching up after weeks of our busy schedules keeping us apart. I had just stepped inside when I heard a familiar laugh, one I had once known better than my own. Melissa. She was sitting at a table near the back, alone. For a moment, I debated walking away, pretending I hadn't seen her. But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need for one final moment of closure. I took a deep breath and walked toward her table. She looked up just as I approached, and her eyes widened slightly. Jake. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Not cautious, not defensive. Just, tired. Melissa. I nodded, glancing at the empty seat across from her. Dinner for one. She gave a small, sad smile. Yeah. Just me. I didn't sit down, didn't linger. There was no need. But standing there, looking at her, I realized something. The anger I had carried for so long was gone. What was left wasn't forgiveness, but it also wasn't hatred. It was just, nothing. And maybe that was the best thing I could feel. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I gave her a polite nod, then turned and walked away, leaving her behind one final time. Lucas was already at the table, watching me with an arched eyebrow. That looked intense. I sat down and picked up the menu. It wasn't. He studied me for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Good. The waiter arrived, and we ordered. The conversation shifted, work, travel, plans for the future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Free. Melissa was a chapter one had finished reading, a story that no longer held meaning in my life. I had closed the book. And I was finally ready to write a new one.